Walking the railroad tracks today, doing like a hobo. We're outside of Monterey, about 5 miles. Walking down the road to one of Monterey's great legends. That's the legend of Headless George. Railroads are such an integral part of Monterey growing up. Coal was still coming out of the eastern part of Tennessee, and every day hundreds of cars came through loaded down with coal, and to get from one side of town to the other we had to literally stop or turn our cars off because the trains were so long. And I was just a little kid, and the cars weren't air conditioned back then, so it was a big deal, especially in the summertime. Well, Dad would keep me from getting restless. He would teach me how to count the various cars going by, and we'd wait for the red caboose, and it became sort of a game. And I thought, yeah, Dad, but 3 blocks down, you could drive underneath the train trestle and go to the other side of town where my grandparents lived. But I think he just wanted to make sure I knew how to count before I went to grade school. Of course, once in school, the teachers knew we lived on that side of the tracks, so they told us, hey, don't ever cross the train tracks. So I learned how to crawl underneath the cars and where the couplings were, and teacher said, don't cross the trains when they're moving. I thought, golly, in the first grade, that made really good sense. And said, if you do, get chopped up. So that brings us to the point of this story, the story of Headless George. Well, the legend goes that it's 1931. There was a night watchman down here, and he was prone to drink. And one night, while he was intoxicated, he was hit by the train, decapitated. And the legend goes that if you stop at the old Woodcliff Bridge, we'll show you in just a few seconds, that you can see his headless body walking along the railroad tracks at night looking for his head. Of course, the other part of the legend is that if you stopped on the bridge, your car could mysteriously die, and it just added some to the legend. Excuse me. But the real story is a little bit different. It involved 2 people. Neither one was named George. One was named Norman, and the other was named Jimmy. And Norman was the one that liked to drink. He had come down to visit Jimmy at the little guard shack down here, and after they had talked a while, Norman decided to leave, and Jimmy tried to talk him into staying because he was drunk, but Norman wouldn't stay. And the next day, Jimmy's making his rounds, checking the train tracks out, and begins to find bits and pieces of Norman scattered along the track. So Norman was the one that got ran over instead of Jimmy, and neither one named George. So I've often thought, why Headless George. Well, Headless Norman doesn't have the same effect, if you think about it. Headless George, a little bit more scary, I guess, but Headless Norman just never did make it into the legend. More serious note, train tracks. Been a vital part of Monterey's history. Started out, my earliest recollection was Tennessee Central. If you're in town in Monterey, stop by the depot, check the museum out. It's got a lot of memorabilia from that area, from that era. Then, after Tennessee Central, became the L&N, I think the Louisville, Nashville. And then it shut down for a long, long time. We just pretty much forgot about the trains. Well, it's more a part of the town history anymore. Then they opened up a sand quarry. The train shut down for a period of time, and then they opened up a sand quarry, and then the track opened back up. Now it's the Nashville Eastern Railroad, and the tracks are back in use, and trains are coming through again every day. So kind of good for the history of Monterey to see this start back. So story of Headless George, what really happened, and we'll get down here to the bridge and give you a look. There are plans in the works for a trail to follow the tracks from Monterey to Cookeville, so that'll be a lot of fun once it's built. Some short sections already done in Monterey and Cookeville on the through the town, so hopefully that'll be up and going in the near future. Of course, it brings up the question, why did we start the story of Headless George? Well, you were younger and driving your date around. A lot of times when we would go to Cookeville, we'd come back up the back way, and great time to tell this story. Get the girl that's with you, get her a little bit scared, maybe she'd scoot a little closer over to you, and accomplish what you set out to do. And then, how in the world's a turtle get in the train track? Can't get out. Anyway, whole deal was to get your dog or your date to scoot over near you, snuggle up a bit. But what caused all that to stop the story of Headless George? Well, I'll blame it on two things: Tennessee Department of Transportation and Detroit. Once the old rickety wood timber bridge was torn down and replaced by the concrete structure, it just didn't have the same effect. Now, I drove an old Dodge Dart 1965. It was prone to stop anywhere, but I never did stop on the bridge because it was so old and rickety. And then what happened to the automobiles? Well, used to be all the cars had a front bench seat. But then Detroit started designing cars It had the bucket seats with the center console, so doesn't matter how scared your date was, she wasn't moving too much. So no bench seats and an old or a brand new concrete bridge, and the story just doesn't have the same effect. So it slowly began to die out. One thing's obvious as you walk the track is when this thing was built, the amount of labor that took to build the track up. You look back and it's pretty amazing how they built up this this whole bed. It's that way all the way from Monterey to Cookeville. Alrighty, we're here where Night Watchman's Jerry, his guard shack was right in this area. When I was a child, the shack was still standing, so this is where Jerry would have been at night to get out of the elements, and where Norman visited Jerry. And you walk on down, you see the new concrete bridge. I think one reason Headless George doesn't come around anymore is he just doesn't like all the graffiti. But that was an old rickety wooden bridge that just was kind of spooky at night. Now, not so much. And under the bridge, as you go through, you see the Rattlesnake Cut. This is where the railroad was cut through a limestone bluff, and I guess there was a danger of falling rock and debris, and his basic job was to inspect the tracks and make sure they were clean. You can see some large rocks off to the side, so I think it's been a constant battle over the years to keep this section of track clear. And that was Jerry's job, was to inspect the track. So there you have it, where the legend of Headless George started. Brings us up to one of life's lessons, and that is to embrace change. Nothing stays the same. My little town of Monterey is nothing like it was 60 years ago. Things that you like and use, they get old, they wear out, they're replaced. Jobs come and go, people in your lives come and go. Need to learn to develop the ability to embrace change, because nothing stays the same. Don't be that person that always clinging to something and wishes things were like they used to be. And the reality of life is things aren't like they used to be. Things change every day. Well, I hope you enjoyed walking the railroad tracks. Great way to get around. It's sort of takes all the curves out of the road. And we were kids, we used the train tracks to get us from one part of town to the other, and we had enough sense to step to the side when the train came. Hope you enjoyed it. This story of the legend of Headless George. Well, alrighty then. I'll talk to you later.